Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Waking Infinity Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Stewart, and I want to start off by asking a couple questions. Do you think you are free? Do you know truly what the word freedom entails, what it costs? Do you believe just about anything that the media and agents of authority tell you? Do you know that the world is currently undergoing an economic and really just a global shift altogether in a way we've never seen in history, right under our noses? Most people don't know about it. Most people don't believe it. The question I really have to ask you is, do you know that you may be consenting to this without fully understanding how you're giving your consent? Well, I have with me today a dear friend. He and I go way back to 2011. We launched a film called Ungrip, and this is very near and dear to my heart. I typically only make films on the things that I really believe in, and I don't outsource that to anybody. But this is somebody that I've looked up to as a mentor, a dear friend, everything above and beyond. I could go deeply into it, but I think I'll just save that for the interview. Back in the day, he was known as Rob in the Pagé family for a very specific reason. We'll get into that, why he didn't just use his legal fiction name. We'll get into what that means for those of you who don't understand that. But since then, I believe it was about 4 years ago, from some elders up in what is called Canada, he was given the title White Walking Feather, and he was given a feather. And I want to get into that story maybe towards the very beginning so you understand the significance of what we're going to start sharing with you. I've been talking a lot about in my Waking Infinity News program that there are these things that are coming that we're experiencing. Some people are saying the dark winter is coming. They're using terms like the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And all of this is very 2020 specific because it seems like that the pandemic is really the impetus to push this forward at lightning speed while everybody is disoriented. And so I really want to get into specifics about this and how we can empower ourselves. I try not to say, how do we fight back? Because in many ways that makes us feel like we're at war. And really, truly, what we are in is an awakening. And that is my belief. But I really want to bring it now to my dear friend, White Walking Feather. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, man. I'm so excited to see you again.
Oh, I got shivers going down my spine listening to that, and I love you dearly, Ben, and I'm very excited to connect with you again. And this is spirit orchestrated because it all stemmed from your last video, and the timing was impeccable because it helped the individual I was helping, and I reached out and gave thanks to you, and all of a sudden I find out that you're talking about this stuff. So here we are, and I'm grateful and honored. Thank you.
Yeah. That video was the five aspects of awakening, and it's any kinds of any kinds of awakening. But psychedelics has been one thing that I did this series Psychedelica on Gaia, and I have a lot of people that are connecting with me about how do I integrate this peak experience that I've had? And so I did a Waking Infinity News segment that I put up on my YouTube channel. You guys should go check it out so you understand what he's referring to. But without further ado, I really want to launch in. And I guess the best place to start is for those of you who haven't seen Ungrip, I would really like I would really like you to maybe just show them how you've gone on this journey from who you were before, and maybe just a couple steps in the journey that really shattered the old paradigm, and you stepped into a new world of being, not just thinking and your concepts, but a new way of living and being in this world. Could you bring the audience a little bit through your journey that leads you up to today?
Sure. For me, it started years ago, suffering through depression and suicide attempts and addictions and, essentially living my own hell. And the journey that I went through to surrender my old ways and to go through a healing process where I learned how to love myself and how to communicate my feelings and establish boundaries and to be able to reconcile relationships and go through that healing process. And that then allowed me to then reconcile my relationship with my wife at the time, and it also helped open my eyes to just how violent and abusive relationships were, not just with other people, but with um, people that wear masks of, the state or corporations and that sort of thing. And so we then decided to move off grid and remove a lot of those connections, because my healing taught me that I'm worthy of having peace in my life and having healthy relationships. And if people aren't going to respect that, then I can say goodbye and say no and walk away. And so that's what I did. And through the film Ungrip, there was images of the earthship that we built and us returning to the land, and the process that I went through to say no and to say goodbye to those that were making claims against me, but doing it in a peaceful way rather than fighting it or going to war. I chose a path of peace and followed that. And even till to this day, like I've left the land back in February, and I've been journeying, um, around Alberta and BC over the last 10 months, um, helping hold space for people to heal and helping people, figure out how they can return to the land and encourage them to do that. I was told by a dear friend in Ontario that, the word walking for the indigenous peoples is a healing medicine, and walking is a ceremony. And there's a reason why the word walking was given to me as part of my spirit name. And so I've been embracing that over the last 10 months as I do this work, and really continue to challenge and confront these colonial constructs that I have in my mind, so I can start decolonizing my mind and my perceptions of how things work, due to it being, taught to us for, 1,000 years or more, since our ancestors in Europe, the original white tribes, were colonized. We've lost a lot of our ceremonies and customs and traditions, and so part of my journey is, through the inspiration of my Red Tribe brothers and sisters, is to work to decolonize myself and start rebuilding our ancient tribes and returning to the land in a sacred way as they had for thousands of years, so that we can then stand together as brothers and sisters instead of in conflict with one another. And so that's kind of the journey that I've taken over the last, 50 plus years.
Decolonizing, such a profound way to put it. I've been looking deeper into the role that technology today seems to be moving in, for the most part. I have no inherent issue with technology, but when I follow this woman now, Alison McDowell, she has wrenchinthegears.com, and she's saying that with technology and this, there's the Internet of Things, and then the Internet of Bodies, which is wearables, ingestibles, implantables, and injectables, things that harness data and even energy from our body. And she says in this way, and with nanodust and nanotechnology, we're being colonized down to the fabric of our being. And you even put it in a more subtle sense of decolonizing the mind and the being itself. I would love to hear a little bit more about what that process might look like. And, we can get deeper into the weeds maybe towards the end, when we get deeper into solutions. But what did you have to come to terms with in terms of how to decolonize yourself? You probably had to face a lot of shadow, a lot of things that people would face through any kind of awakening. Could you take us a little bit through what that looks like, what that feels like, what that was to you, discovering, and how, to come up with ways to decolonize yourself at such a subtle level?
As you know, I started a school, White Walking Feather School for the Pace of Arts, and the whole premise of that is to learn the art of peace. You know, there's lots of schools out there for martial arts to teach you the art of war, and you know, we're living in a society that's, you know, based on war. But I don't know of any schools that teach peace specifically. So I actually used. I'm a third degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I'm using the protocols that I used uh, to teach peace. And the core of the school is the Sacred Heart Circle. And within that circle, we face our shadows, and you know, the whole idea is to set up a safe space so that people can feel supported, and as they go through being vulnerable and confronting those shadows that most of us tend to stuff in our body or cover with masks, or you know, laugh off, or you know, that kind of stuff. um, and you know, for me, it's critical that we do that work, because you know, we're dealing with multi generations of trauma that's being handed down from generation to generation. And so in my view, we're not only healing ourselves, but we're also healing our ancestors. And that's the awakening part that we work on in the school, is to acknowledge that this isn't just for ourselves, but we're also healing multiple generations at the same time. And that's can be overwhelming for some, but when we do that work, we can then start to take off the masks and take off um, the blinders that we use to lie to ourselves, and start asking us some really hard questions. And through the decolonization classes, we ask those questions and start to explore, you know, if we're healthy and we work on forgiving ourselves and forgiving others, and learning how to embrace peace and love for one another, how do we then express that in our actions and behaviors? And we start to challenge ourselves on, um, you know, how often we've justified dehumanizing others, or justified violence because it's legal, or because it's socially acceptable. And to me, socially acceptable principles don't fly, because if we boil it down and we really connect to our heart space and to our spirit, we feel that it's not acceptable. And so how do we reconcile that and change our behaviors so we can actually express respect and honor and patience and forgiveness with one another, without forcing our will upon one another? And boundaries is a huge component of that. The boundary for me was not only to establish it so that I can acknowledge when people are violating me, but also I use it to acknowledge when I violate somebody else. So the boundaries go both ways. And self-governance was all about self-restricting myself so that I don't violate others, and also have the strength and the authority within myself to acknowledge when people are violating me, and to confront them on it when it happens. And so that's the process that we go through in the school. And then that allows us to evaluate all our relationships. And that not only includes, you know, our relationship with ourselves, but, you know, our spouse, family, friends, neighbors, strangers, but also the fictional constructs that have grown up that we use to govern our social interaction with one another, and really start to ask some really tough questions. And I use that to, in a peaceful way, confront people and challenge them to explore that based on these foundational spiritual principles, rather than legal constructs that we find their foundation or their scope slips over time. And returning back to a core foundation allows me to then evaluate my relationships on something that's solid, and doesn't migrate with the changing times or changing perceptions. And so that's kind of the journey that we went through in the school, and that's based on the work that I've done over the last 20 years since my recovery.
Yeah. So what I heard there was, the slippery slope of becoming losing a little bit of our vigilance in where that boundary line lies, um, and also allowing for the incremental, the tiptoe of violations, where violations become so commonplace that we don't know where the original starting line was. We're just used to every now and then giving up a little more, giving up a little more. You
Yeah.
mentioned the part of decolonizing the mind is also, well, the part of colonizing the mind, it seems like a lot of it is education. And I think back to just one instance upon many is Hawaii. And when the Hawaiian kingdom was taken over, one of the very first things that was changed was the education of the children. They weren't allowed to use their own language, and they were given a different kind of education that their ancestors were too simple and they were savage and they didn't know how to govern themselves. So they needed the white man that stepped in. And part of that, what it sounds like you're doing with the Pesa Marts is, re-educating and educating, even, kind of means not putting new information in, it's drawing forth what we already know, what we've known, and it's more of a remembering. And so I guess I want to say here, because I've had somebody comment on something that I put in Esoteric Agenda 2, which I feel the person was mistaken in how I put it forth, but it was actually a very poignant thing to say, where according to international law, it's so much has been violated about the way that it was that basically Hawaiian Kingdom was under a treaty, and international law was supposed to protect them, but it was still taken over. And 100 years later, Bill Clinton even acknowledged it, but nothing happened. And there's still this incremental tiptoe. They've been placing satellites and observatories on top of Mauna Kea, their sacred space of Mauna Kea. And every single time they do it without permission, and then it's kind of forgotten about, and then they want more. And then eventually this 30-meter telescope wants to go 2 stories into the ground and take up acres of land. And this is where they said, enough is enough. We've already given you too much. And that was more than we wanted to give you. You've already taken too much. So I guess where I'm going with this is this individual mentioned, the UN is not our friend. You shouldn't be calling upon the UN to honor international law and to protect them. And I found that quite curious. And it's kind of this paradox that I feel like a lot of people don't know how to hold. And I wonder whether I even understand it correctly. I don't always look at the UN as being a friend, but then again, a potential friend, a teacher, humans that may be lost and misguided and feel like they have a little bit more authority. But I try never to place anybody into the enemy category, this thing where we can never reconcile our differences. Maybe under that name, under that guise, that has to go away. Maybe under the type of ideas of what kind of rule and authority the UN has. But this idea that the UN is not allowed to rectify this issue, it's kind of paradoxical, because like where does the issue lie? How are we meant to resolve it? I could see where this person was coming from, and I want to kind of hear from you on your thoughts about not just the global groups like the UN, the World Economic Forum, and where they stand in terms of being authority, claiming themselves, we are a global voice and we're going to try and bring solutions to the world because things are so messed up. Should we allow for these groups, whether we think they're not in proper standing of authority, should we allow these groups back into the roundtable conversation if we are going to rise up as, let's say, a disempowered group? I know you probably see where I'm going with this, but how should we view this so we know we're not being taken for a ride and being told, oh, we're doing this for you. We're going to take you guys to the promised land. We're going to usher you into a more sustainable future. How should we view this so we're not giving up the farm, if you will?
Well, let me use a context I'm familiar with because up here in northern Turtle Island, um, the Nehuan people signed Treaty 6 and experienced very similar processes where their kids were taken to residential schools, and thousands of kids died, and dealing with the buffalo being wiped out and disease, and the the courts have actually ruled cultural genocide that took place here, but yet the remedy still hasn't been presented, and the march of the state continues to push pipelines and that sort of thing through, and the indigenous people here, the Nehuan, take the state to court, and in BC the courts actually ruled against the state and created indigenous title, and they viewed that as a victory. But I'm not viewing that as such, because what I've found since Ungrip is that despite people claiming that feudalism is over, feudalism is very much alive and well, and the land has been placed under the feudal domain of the crown, the Queen and Right of Alberta or the Queen and Right of Canada. And when we go to her courts, we're going as feudal serfs looking for remedy. And what the courts did was they created a new feudal tenure. People are already familiar with feudal tenure of fee simple, title over private land. That comes from feudalism from hundreds of years ago, and they created a new one just to appease the indigenous in BC. But the land still is under the domain of the crown, and so the crown can still impose certain restrictions, um, or force pipelines to go through and that kind of stuff, because in the end, people don't understand or comprehend the full relationship that we're in. And so for me, the work that I did is I realized this, and removed myself as a feudal serf, and I now stand under spiritual jurisdiction on the land as the queen's brother. I see the queen as my sister, and I see everybody else as subjects of my sister. And so when I address issues, I address them as I stand as a spiritual being and an equal to the queen and an equal to the pope. I don't see their title, I don't see their authority. I see them as spiritual beings holding a certain position because people ask them to. And so I'm not here to destroy the government or bring it down or any of that kind of stuff, because I have to acknowledge that people depend on them and people ask for that. And so I will respect that. What I do is I confront them because I'm standing as a spiritual being, and I need the access to the land in order for me to return back to my nature. And so part of this process is for me to be consciously aware of what that relationship looks like, and make sure that I don't unconsciously or by mistake act like a child, and reconnect myself as a feudal serf, and ask for benefits and privileges from the Queen Mother, because I'm a child and I don't know how to look after myself.
So let me, just for the audience, put that into perspective the way that I heard it. So getting back to, let's say, Hawaii in this instance, because they signed that treaty, they may not have understood, let's say, the other party that they were treatying under, and that's a contract that they entered into to be taken care of by this entity. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying, and I'll explain it with Treaty 6. The elders that signed Treaty 6 knew what was going on, and so they held ceremony, they held dance, and held the pipe, and they infused the spirit of peace and the intent of sharing this land with the queen. But the queen, um, dishonored that treaty and interpreted it in her own way and used force to enforce her interpretation rather than honoring the spirit of the treaty. And so we're dealing with the crown that's been committing fraud and violating spirit in her dealings and forcing that upon the people of the land. And that's the premise behind me confronting them and holding them accountable so that we can honor the true spirit of Treaty 6 as it was intended, that we co-share, co-steward this land peacefully and not interfere with one another, and bring prosperity to the land and to all the people, not just the rich or the privileged.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I didn't know that they actually held ceremony, danced on the rim, shared the pipes. That's incredible. So that definitely brings a different spin to it. They weren't kind of pushed to sign anything. They decided to make this a brotherhood and a sisterhood.
Oh, they were pushed. Like they were facing starvation and guns, and some of the. I heard from some of the Nahuan people sharing stories of cannons literally circling the camp where they signed the treaty. So, there's a great deal of intimidation and threats and genocide to force these treaties. And I would also suggest too that the lieutenant governor that was responsible for signing the treaties was being paid bonuses and engaged in language manipulation and all that kind of stuff. If you ask the indigenous people if they're prepared to cede the land, they interpret it as seed, like, SEED, put seeds in the land.
Right.
Of course they would agree to that, but that's not the seed that their government was talking about. They're talking about CEDE, like turning over the land. But the chiefs didn't have authority to do that because the land is held by the grandmothers, not the men. The men only had the authority to negotiate peace. If the crown wanted the land, they had to negotiate with the clan mothers. Interesting.
Okay, so I'm glad I'm asking these questions and you're clarifying, because now it's painting a different picture. They were forced in many ways, and yet they still held ceremony to do it in honor, which is very beautiful.
Yes.
Wow. So help me, I guess where I kind of want to go with this is now the actions that you're taking. You sent me 3 letters that you had sent out to the lieutenant governor of Alberta, correct? And these 3 letters, one was just letter to lieutenant governor of Alberta. The next one was notice of default. And the next one was invitation to sacred ceremony, which I find fantastic. And I want to read one part of this. You mentioned, well, here, let me get to the original one. The way you start it is by saying, I am writing in regards to the land identified with the Demesne. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, it's pronounced domain. But,
okay, domain.
But the Demesne is the feudal term for the crown holding land.
Okay, so I am writing in regards to the land identified within the Demesne or domain of the crown, with a fee simple claimed by Her Majesty the Queen in right of Alberta, also commonly referred to as Crown Land. To be clear, I waive my right to be represented as a person and instead present the resurrected nature of all that I am, known and unknown, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. I am not a feudal serf, citizen, or subject to the Crown, Her Majesty the Queen in right of Alberta, Her Majesty the Queen in right of Canada, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, any other corporation, sole, or individual within this physical realm. I owe no service, hold no tenure or titles, nor do I receive any benefits or privileges from any of the entities or individuals mentioned in this paragraph or addressed in this letter. And then the last sentence I want to read is, I am a stranger and a sojourner during my time here on Mother Earth as I work hard to serve Creator. What a way to start a letter. You know, I have to say that's an incredible way to start a letter, but can you explain why you had to specify all that? What is the power in specifying what you did?
I do that because I don't want to cause confusion or force people to make assumptions. And, people are the crown is used to feudal serfs talking to them. And I want to make it very, very clear that I'm not a feudal serf. And so any correspondence that they receive from me is coming from the expression of me, not some fictional construct or relationship that no longer exists. So it's my duty and responsibility to provide clarity. And so that's the whole point of that first paragraph, is to make sure that they're very, very clear on who they're dealing with.
Well, it's very, very powerful. There's in the second letter, the notice of default. I want to see, there's one spot that I thought I highlighted in here. You said, despite the honor and respect due to me, I must testify with great sadness and sorrow upon my heart that I've been ignored and disrespected by you and the office you hold for years. I will not tolerate this deplorable and abusive behavior, coated with a profound lack of integrity, important word there, by you or anybody else. I hold you accountable to the oath that you made to serve my sister, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, along with the duty to maintain the honor and integrity of the crown and the spiritual laws that govern us all. Could you explain that? Because you said something that at first I had to read it over and over again to understand where you're going with it, but I hold you accountable to the oath that you made to serve my sister, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Could you explain a little bit of that, why you put that in there?
Well, when the Queen swore her coronation oath, she swore an oath to uphold the laws of the Bible and to be a protector of the faith. And so when people come to office, they swear an oath to her, which binds them because they're actually serving her, not the people. That's where most people get confused, is they think these public servants are there to serve the people. They're not. They're there to serve the Queen. And that's clear within their oaths. And so I'm holding them accountable to that oath. And confronting them on their failure to do so, through whether it be through corruption or greed or any human failings that we all have a susceptibility to. I forgive them, and I've forgiven them many times throughout those letters, but I still hold them accountable. And forgiveness doesn't mean that they can just walk away and not deal with the consequences of their behavior. Forgiveness is for me to let go of the trauma or the harm or the energy, so that I'm freed of that, and so that I can stand and confront them and hold them accountable, and hopefully I can then help them redeem themselves by confronting them, and hopefully that they will find the errors of their ways and resurrect themselves and bring them back into good standing with Spirit.
And in order to do this, you actually give them an avenue, which is really, I have to say, man, this is super powerful. I didn't expect it. This is the invitation to sacred ceremony. And you wrote this letter to Your Honor Salma Lakhani and the Honorable Jason Kenney. And you said, I am hereby summon you both, you state their names, and to a sacred ceremony to receive a forgiveness blessing, to be witness to the transfer of this land from the domain of the Crown and or Her Majesty the Queen in right of Alberta and or Her Majesty the Queen in right of Canada to the jurisdiction of the Creator, and to witness your withdrawal from this land. In the name of the Creator, I hereby declare this land to be sacred, peaceful, and neutral territory under spiritual jurisdiction. No war, armed conflict, hostiles, or violation of spiritual law shall occur on, over, under, or around this land. A 1/2 mile zone shall be established around the perimeter of this land to ensure there is no risk of incursion by any of your feudal combatants, military or police personnel, your occupation and claim of ownership of this land has ended. That very last line, it gets me. It's because it's no longer a request at that point. You say your occupation and claim of ownership over this land has ended, and you're offering them forgiveness, and you're giving them an avenue to do what is right by their spirit and their soul. It seems you are giving them an avenue to come back into right standing with spirit. What did it have to take for you to get to this point? And the ceremony will start precisely at 6:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, December 21st, 2020. That is a very sacred moment to do it. And actually, at this very time, it almost seems like there will be a ceremony at Uluru in Australia. And I don't know if you heard about this, but there is a ceremony at Uluru. It's not an open ceremony. It's actually closed to the indigenous. And I won't go deep into detail, but they say they have a prophecy that says they will enact something that will start changing the frequency of the planet. And the change will have then begun. And it's interesting you chose this date. It is also the winter solstice. But I want to stay on point here. You are offering them to come back into right standing. What did it have to take inside you for you to offer them this ceremony, this invitation to ceremony, and a forgiveness blessing?
You'll have to forgive me because this is quite emotional for me.
Yeah, I understand.
Um, Spirit asked me to do this, and this is something that my intellect is still struggling to comprehend the significance of this. And for quite a while, I refused to do it, and Spirit kept insisting, and so I've dedicated my life to walking this path, and so I'm going to do this despite how I feel about it, because I'm scared. Scared not that they will show up, but scared that they actually will show up. And I had to forgive them, and I also had to challenge myself on what being a steward of the land actually means. For the last 15 years, I've been stewarding land, but it was land that was private, and so setting boundaries and kind of being the king of that domain and controlling it and that kind of stuff. And when I started contemplating this idea of in ceremony, when 4 years ago when the Nehuen gave me that white eagle feather and my spirit name, the elder also told me, like, you are the land. And I didn't really comprehend the significance of that until back in February. I left the land I've been on for 13 years and found myself quite vulnerable and disconnected but Spirit asked me to do this walking ceremony. Walking is a sacred medicine of the Nehuen people here. And so I've been around Alberta and BC helping people and realize that we can't really be free unless the land is free too. And I have within my nature a draw to be on the land, just like the moose and the deer, the woodpeckers and the mice and the ants and the trees and the medicine. And that's a part of me as this thing, you know, this flesh vessel that I currently have having this physical experience with, and realizing that the crown claims it all, whether it's under, you know, a claim of crown land or privately held land or any of that kind of stuff. It's still controlled, and a claim of ownership is taken by all the countries of the world. Like, I don't know of any land that is free of that kind of claim. And so I felt moved to start rolling that back and returning the land back to spiritual law, and return it back to Creator, as it was before they got here. You know, I believe what the Nehuan of Treaty 6 have been trying to teach me the whole time is that nobody can claim the land. Any claim of ownership over land puts us all into involuntary slavery, because our bodies are just as much a part of the land as anything else. And I knew that the knowledge and experience that I had put me in a position where I could do something about it. And I don't know of anybody else doing this kind of work. You know, I often long for a mentor, an elder, but I don't have that. Spirit's kind of guiding me to rebuild our ancient white tribes, because our tribes have been colonized for 1,000+ years, and to be able to stand on the land as equals with our tribe intact, with our red tribe brothers and sisters with their tribes intact, in the spirit of Treaty 6, as co-stewards of this land and not interfering with one another. That's just something I have to do. I can't think of, I think it would be a dishonor and disrespect for me to have this knowledge and this experience and not do something about it and walk away. Wouldn't be able to live with myself if I did that. So despite my fear, despite my doubts, I feel Spirit is asking me to stand up and speak for the land, give the land a voice, give Spirit a voice. And at times I don't feel worthy to do that. So I struggle. I struggle with that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you for showing humility and vulnerability. And there's so much strength in that I see, that not just our audience, but really the world, that allows themselves to be separated from the land, to be separated from our brothers and sisters because of narratives, ideas and stories and concepts. And, I feel like one thing that we could all learn from just this one letter, which helps me understand it, is, all human beings are colonized, even the ones who are enacting the colonization. And forgiveness, to hold the forgiveness blessing, even if they don't show up, we know this, they're here. The indigenous would put it their way, quantum theorists would put it their own way, but they're here. There's no denying that. And to forgive, but also to still stand in right action. It doesn't stop once the forgiveness has happened. There's real work to be done here. What would you say most people out there who are experiencing a lot of fear, anxiety, vulnerability, maybe even experiencing trauma based upon the paradigm that they've invested so deeply in, crumbling before their eyes, a changing economy, their businesses going under, this whole thought that our political system is being shattered and something else needs to be ushered in, and it's beyond our command, it's beyond our control. What would you say the average person could do in a moment like this, in what's happening in 2020, in what might be coming in 2021? I won't go deeply into the details, but I've said it in previous episodes before, where I see a lot of this going. I could be right, I could be wrong, but if even a fraction of what I'm saying is right, a lot of where the world is headed with technology and surveillance is just a furthering incremental colonization, going deeper and deeper into not just, it's everywhere around you. You can't go on the street without cameras aimed at you, but eventually it's going to be on you, inside you, and down to it's already in our psyche, but down to the fabric of who we are. What can average people do? How do we reclaim our power without having to ask permission or ask for others to change who they are?
Well, for me, it's about surrender. And this isn't a military term, but, back in 2001, I surrendered my old ways to learn new ways of feeling and communicating and viewing my relationship with myself, and challenging my old concepts and principles that I govern myself by and that kind of stuff, to learn a new way. And since then, I've been going through surrender processes. This latest letter was a surrender, pretty much the latest surrender to allow spirit to orchestrate how I walk this path, and trust that spirit is going to guide me through that, and to work through my feelings, and let go of these old ideas that aren't serving me anymore, and to acknowledge that I can't change other people. All I can do is change myself and walk my path. So for me to engage in the system, to protest or riot or change legislation or any of that kind of stuff, is just me soliciting the coercive violence of the state, or other forms of violence to try to change people, which is violating themselves. And for me, trusting that I can do this just by walking my path, and I have faith that there are other people out there doing work like this, that I'm not aware of, because I can only see this little part, but spirit can see everything. And I just have to trust that spirit is orchestrating other stuff too, and I just need to make sure that I do my part. So I empower myself by knowing that I can do my part. I can take action. I can walk my path. I can confront people. I can plant seeds. I can share ideas. I can hold space for healing. I can help challenge people, or bring knowledge and wisdom to help them with their journey, and just have faith that it's going to unfold as it needs to. But I need to make sure that I do my part, because if I abdicate that and just give in to the fear and curl up in my bed and go back into depression, then I'm not serving anybody, and I'm not being authentic to myself either, and I'm not being honorable to how I feel or to the messages that I'm receiving. And so for people that are new on this path, or partway through, or even the same spot I am, or even more advanced, I'm sure that we can all agree that, you know, if we can learn to forgive one another and be patient with one another and plant those seeds and stand in our truth and stand in our light and you know, express love and patience, and you know, I know we can make a difference. And I've seen people shift. I've seen violent situations be de-escalated and become peaceful afterwards when people stand and confront them in a peaceful way. You know, uh, I've seen or heard stories of people that were confronted with authority, you know, officers and that kind of stuff, and they're able to de-escalate it because they approached it this way. And you know, I think if we can do that, we can then reach that hand out to them, and hopefully they will grab onto our hand and want to walk that path and let go of their violence and their authority and their claim over others, and find a new way of having relationships with one another.
I really like that. You know, I receive a lot of emails from people who they say you know, they're either just starting out, or they've understood a lot of these concepts of what's happening in the world on an analytical level, but now that they actually see it in the world, and it's becoming a lot less of just something that they read in a book or online, and they start noticing, I can no longer be a spectator. And that's where the fear starts to come in. Like, there's actually something being asked of them in particular. And so I get a lot of people asking me, like, listen, I want to play my part. How do I connect with that? How do I listen properly? How do I know what it is that's being asked of me? I want to play my part. Do I get involved in, you know, groups, in online communities? What are some practical things? And they're really trying to get me to break it down into brass tacks. And so I mention, you know, a lot of things. I constantly mention for people to meditate. Please connect with yourself, meditate, connect with your food in meditation, you know, connect with the land with your actual feet, not just with your shoes. Listen to the contours of the land with your feet. Listen to nature, be in nature. And you've already mentioned this. You know, we are the land. And if we are separated from the land, which is something, I know we spoke about this beforehand, and you know, I don't believe we need to go too deeply in it, but this thing that most people, if you've watched my films in the past, or if you're paying attention to this whole thing with the fourth industrial revolution, is Agenda 21, which then turned to Agenda 2020. I think now it's Agenda 2030, and they're just calling it sustainable development. But one of the big ideas is allowing nature to flourish again, which sounds great on the surface of it, but for the most part, it's by separating the people from being able to access wildlife. And I thought that to be quite peculiar, because I get the concept, but when I listen to these podcasts and things like that, it's basically saying we are responsible for destroying, you know, nature. We are responsible for climate change. We are responsible for all this. And to me, it seems like that word "we" may be a little too inclusive, and not the mass majority has been, you know, we do have our own responsibility in a lot of the ways. We pay with our dollars, we pay with our energy, we pay with our decisions, and we also pay with our ignorance and not knowing how we feed this grand orchestra that's happening. But I guess the point that I'm getting at is, people are asking, like, I feel like such a little part of this, and there's this great big grand agenda. How do I connect with my own personal part? How do I actually understand what it is that I can offer? Because I want to, I just don't know whether I'm fooling myself or not. I constantly get that. And is there anything that you could say to these people?
Yeah, in my book, Graduating Life with Honors, which I wrote after Ungrip about 5 years ago, I ask an important question. Are we physical beings searching for some sort of spiritual enlightenment, or are we spiritual beings having a physical experience? And if you look through and explore that question, you know, which I did in the book, I came to the conclusion that we are spiritual beings and we're having this physical experience. And in order for me to do that, I had to build a healthy relationship with my physical vessel. Some people will say, part of this process is to surrender your intellect so that, spirit is the master. And to me, my relationship between spirit and my physical vessel has to be akin to a marriage, where spirit has certain skills and abilities. My physical vessel has skills and abilities. They need to learn to work together and trust one another. And to do that, I found the Sacred Heart Circles, healing our trauma, and challenging the false principles that we grew up with, and finding a way to balance between the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and find that balance and that symbiotic relationship, so that we're not in a codependent relationship between spirit and the physical, but instead the physical and the spirit are viewed and treated as being independent, so they can work on building an interdependent relationship with one another. And when we can accomplish that balance and center ourselves, that, in my view, is an expression of Christ-level consciousness that we can then use in our expression of how we then interact with the outside world. And those are things that people can actually do. We do that by holding sacred space for one another. We do that by meditating. We do that by engaging in ceremony. Within the school, as an introduction, I have students go through a staff ceremony where they go out into the bush, and they have to quiet their mind and allow the trees to communicate with them and ask for permission, because we don't want to force our will upon even a tree. I believe the nature is here to be of service to us, and we're in service to it. And so when we hear a language older than words and connect with the spirit of the trees and the spirit of the animals, and ask them for their consent and tell them why we're there, I believe that that gives them an opportunity to prepare themselves and sacrifice themselves in order to serve us. And the tree is then used as a staff where we can then peel the bark, and that represents all the trauma and the armor that we want to heal and surrender to Creator and get back to our core of who we are. And the staff then provides us with a symbol of that as we walk our path and our journey, by surrendering that which we no longer want to carry with us to the Creator, and have the strength to be able to walk that path. And that's the symbolism that I use, that hopefully will empower people to find the courage within themselves to then be able to stand up and express themselves and be able to communicate their boundaries and confront those who would violate them.
I love that. I love that. I'm thinking back to somebody who might have been earlier this week, who asked me after the last Waking Infinity News, said, I forget where it was that he lives now, actually, but he was saying, I think it was UK. And he said, I really appreciate the work that you're bringing forth. I just have to ask, if authorities happen to come to my door and say that they are going to vaccinate my child, or that, anything having to do with my being the parent of this child, but I seem to feel like there's this kind of legal lingo that is allowing now authorities to feel like they have authority over our children. And one of the things even happened here in DC, where children at the age of 11 years old can consent to getting inoculated at school, and they will not report it to the parents, and even it will be docked on their health insurance, but any language of it will be removed. So there's not very much of a way for the parents to even find out about it. So this guy is like quite concerned about that. And he said, all the spiritual stuff sounds great. Awakening, psychedelics, I love it. But like, what happens if an authority figure is at my door? And I did say, listen, a lot of the way that you address people is how you will get treated back in return. So please don't diminish any of these other things that I'm talking about. But I will also go and talk to my dear friend who you actually just, I think that very night, also emailed me and you said, hey, the awakening episode helped a friend of mine. And I said, very interesting that you're connecting with me now because I have a question to ask you. I said that I would ask from this person. So I want to honor that this person asked that question. What are your thoughts on that? In this, it's a hypothetical scenario, so it's kind of difficult to give specifics, but how would you address that question?
Well, again, this is the things that I teach within my school, and I know some people are uncomfortable, but I have to bring scripture into the conversation because it's the teachings of Christ that I use. And the one passage specifically is to agree with thy adversary quickly, lest you be dragged in front of a judge and put into prison. And I don't think many organized religions would actually teach people how to do that. But what I've done is, and I've done this with Child Protective Services, I've helped families, protect themselves and their kids from being taken away by CPS. And, I've used this with banks and municipalities and all that kind of stuff. And so when anybody makes a claim against us, and the other thing I'm going to say too is that most of the governments in the world are actually based on scripture. So if you want to learn how to interact with governments, you need to learn scripture because that's how they're founded. So when somebody makes a claim, the burden of proof is on the one making the claim. And so I agree to their claim on the condition that they can provide the burden. And it's with my knowledge of scripture, statutes, regulations, charters, freedom of rights, all that kind of stuff. All of those things don't apply to me. It actually applies to them. It's their box that they're supposed to function in. And if I don't know what the box looks like, then they're going to do whatever they want. And that's what we're experiencing now is people, it's actually the civilian's duty to keep authority in the box. But most people have abdicated that authority, that duty, and now we're faced with authority that's run amok. And it's going to be hard to put the authority back in the box, but we do that by knowing what the box looks like and get them to prove that they're actually functioning within the box. And that usually shuts them up very, very quickly. I've also contemplated ideas about re-engaging fee schedules and notice of liability, but for the most part, I think a well drafted notice or letter that people can then present, when authority comes knocking on your door or when you get the letter in the mail or that sort of thing, will help to start putting that authority back in the box. But it does take courage, and for me, I've been willing to sacrifice even my vessel's life in order to confront authority and put it back in the box, because I feel a duty to do so. So it all depends on how comfortable people are, or how well they can deal with their feelings and the anxiety and the stress and all that kind of stuff. And again, that's why the Sacred Heart Circle is so important, is because if we can do that work to heal all that, then we can better manage those feelings when authority does come knocking on the door.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That really puts it in perspective. I encourage everybody listening to to really watch Ungrip, and I want to give you the opportunity to at the end we'll show people where they can find your book, Graduating Life with Honors. But I wanted to see if we could close out with something like a special treat for people. Is there a prayer or something that you would be able to share with the audience, simply to listen to and kind of behold as just a divine moment right now, but also as an example of how, the language of how we can kind of bring other people into ceremony? Is there something that you think you'd be able to share with us?
I would actually do a prayer right now, but I can't find my matches to light my smudge.
Well, let us go ahead and pause this, and we'll
Okay.
reconvene in 3 minutes.
Okay.
I really think this would be very beautiful, so I'm going to pause
Okay.
right now. All right, we're back. This is going to be very special. I can't think of anybody else in the world that I would have a moment at the end of a podcast actually do a prayer, or at least no one better than my good friend here, White Walking Feather. So let's I'll hand it over to you, and really just the intent here is to just bring people into a sacred moment. This is an evergreen podcast. People can watch it at any time and connect with this moment. So I have here tobacco and some sage to follow along on my end, and I'll just hand it over to you, my man. And I just have to say, there's also nobody else that would ever get me to smoke a pipe in my office, but this is a very rare and amazing moment. So thank you.
Heavenly Father, Earthly Mother, I want to express my gratitude and appreciation to my brother, Ben Stewart, and the courage and integrity it takes for him to be able to hold this kind of space and share this kind of message. I have a deep respect for him, and I want to acknowledge the beautiful work that he's doing. And I ask for your guidance and patience as we work through the healing journey that we're on. Life is all about relationships, and we're finding the relationships are kind of confusing at times, and we're asked for your guidance as we go through that healing process and heal the trauma that we've experienced, and let go of the masks that we hold that prevent us from being our authentic selves. And we ask for courage and strength and the support from others so that we may walk this path as we need to and help others do the same. We ask for guidance as we start to rebuild our ancient white tribes with the integrity and spirit and the balance that's required of us to be able to return to the land and build that connection that our red brothers often speak about and try to teach us, but we were blind and deaf to the spirit of their messages. So we ask that we can continue this hard work so that we can meet them and be able to reconcile our relationship with them and rebuild those relationships that have been damaged by so many years of colonization and genocide, and honor the spirit of what it means to share this land and be true brothers and sisters with one another, and to replenish this land as we were commanded to. And we ask that the teachings that we need to do that are presented to us, and we ask for us to find the courage to open our minds and our hearts to be open to those teachings and surrender our old ways and find the courage to explore new ways of living with and sharing with one another that may feel uncomfortable now, but we will find ways to find that peace and comfort within ourselves as we venture on this journey and be able to hold space for others to do the same.
No. That was great, man. That was really from the heart. So beautiful. I actually even forgot we were recording. And I think this is a great testament to times are changing. And I feel, there's so many podcasts out there. There's so much digital media we can consume where, especially men, feel like they need to be hard, they need to be macho, they can't show themselves, we can't show that we're emotional creatures, and a lot of the times we feel as much as humor is such a divine thing, a lot of the times we feel we need to hide behind jokes and sarcasm and different masks to show that we're still a man's man. And I think we're entering a new era. And I think, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being, such an example for me. You taught me a lot about how to confront, and be comfortable in the face of confrontation, and to see fears as teachers, and to be able to even do this ancient trick of seeing what we would once call enemies, obstacles, or weaknesses as being the very things we need to bring more of our attention on, because that's where the beauty and the gifts of life lie. And I can't say enough how much you've taught me in the times that very infrequent times that we've actually gotten together in the flesh, but I feel like I've known you for lifetimes, and I feel like I've learned so much from you. And I feel like that's also something that we could learn, is that we are in this new digital era, and as much as many people look at it as being the surveillance state and such an impediment to our freedom, we can also use it for exactly what it does offer us. I've gotten to be a part of your life so much deeper than the grand total of maybe 2 weeks, maybe a little longer, that we've spent together. I feel like I've known you like a brother for years. So that is also very much so thanks to technology, and thanks to all those beautiful minds and inventors that came up with the technology. No matter whether Silicon Valley started as a militarized defense state, all these people are brothers and sisters, and there is some honor and respect that we can't deny any of the living sentient creatures here. So I just want to say thank you for who you are and what you represent. And there's no better examples out there. And I guess this is what I've been feeling for a while, that I've been researching these things, what's happening on the planet, for so long. And now that I'm seeing it, I said it before, we can't be spectators anymore. Now we're being asked to step up and step into who we really are. And I want to thank you for being, a guide for people to acknowledge that in a way that doesn't have to be too complex. And it's right here. It's free. It's already within us. We have what we need.
I'm humbled and deeply touched by your words and your expression of spirit. I see you as a strong spiritual being, and what I admire of you most is your ability to be able to communicate that with people. your ability to use imagery and words and art to express and communicate with people in ways that I often am humbled by, because I don't have that gift like you do. My gift is the written word, and I love writing, and but you have a way of connecting with people, and I've always respected and honored your approach and your methodology and your intent behind that work. And I know how challenging it is, and dealing with opposing views and that kind of stuff. And I've always witnessed you respecting people and honoring them despite their views. And to me, that's an example, for us to learn by. And I've seen you be an example and to influence people through example by how you live your life and the expression of your work. And I respect and honor that tremendously. And I love you deeply as a brother. And, even though we've only spent, like you said, a few weeks face to face over the last, I don't know, dozen years,
Yeah.
or more, the moment we get together, it's like time never went by. And if we can remember that the technology is just a tool.
Yes.
And it's how we use that tool. It's our intent is the expression of the tool. And if we can shift our intent to being honorable and peaceful and respectful, then we can continue to use these tools to help the betterment of our brothers and sisters and confront those that would use this technology for harmful intent, because it's not the technology that's the problem. It's the intent of the people that are using it. And we need to, in my view, need to be consciously aware of that and help them so that we can bring them back into good standing and welcome them back into the tribes that are building. And I find that if we can heal ourselves and open up our tables and welcome them, they will come. Just as the land is calling us, we have to call them as well too. And I find that your work is an expression of that, and that's what humbles me and gives me great gratitude for you and our paths crossing. So thank you, Ben. I love you.
Yeah. Thank you. I love you as well. I find when you said you're humbled by me, it's like the heart being humbled by the voice. I feel like what I've learned from you, I'm humbled by it, and really I just get the privilege of making art out of what I learned from you. I really love what you said about helping them, and instead of rising up against and fighting against, it's helping them. And it just made me think, because I was trying to think of like ways to expand this out to what could other people do in their own areas, their own pieces of land with their community around them, is their own version of inviting to sacred ceremony their community. But instead of defund the police campaigns, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, I feel like the verbiage is divisive at its core. Where before we even get to talking about those things, why aren't we starting a dialogue? I don't see people coming out and saying, well, let's, instead of having some kind of protest and action where we know SWAT teams are going to show up, and we know that they're going to show up because things get hostile, things get out of control, how do we call for a celebration together? And it's very difficult now. I believe me, I get that. Like right now, there's stay-at-home orders everywhere, and there seems to be do as I say, not as I do, kind of hypocrisy I won't go into specific names, but, governors, mayors, politicians saying, you guys need to follow this edict, and I'm going to go and break my own rules, violate the very thing that I'm trying to do in the quest to serve humanity, but I'm going to violate it over here. I feel like, how do we help that sickness? Because it is a sickness. And I really think that you nailed. I'm so glad I read these things, because I glanced through it before when you sent me these documents, but I read through it again and it hit me, this invitation to sacred ceremony. This is more or less how we should be gathering if we're going to be gathering. Everything should be a sacred ceremony in some respect, in an inclusive way. And I don't have the full answer, but I do know that it at least starts by understanding that we don't want to cut ourselves off and divide ourselves from the people that we're asking solutions from. It very much so makes no sense.
For me, it was really helpful when I finally realized that the state, my relationship with the state, was the greatest gift they ever gave me, because it was their behavior that woke me up to how abusive and that kind of stuff it was, which then prompted me to then take responsibility for my life and to continue the healing and learn about forgiveness and that sort of thing. And for me, I see what's going on right now. It's uncomfortable and it's violent and abusive and all that kind of stuff, but it's serving us in ways that we're just starting to comprehend now. And I see that as a gift. And for me, when I went through my healing, I had to crash and burn, because I needed to get to that lowest low where I had to then face the choice, change or die. And that's that surrender that I was talking about. And I see the world going through that now. Like, the world is going to go through a process where we're going to be faced with a choice, change or die. But that's a gift in my view, because that allows us to make that choice and start opening ourselves up to learning a new way of living and interacting with one another. And that's the beautiful part of it in my view.
Yeah, it feels like growing up, because you mentioned that, change or die. That could sound like, very extreme or dramatic, but really, if you think about it, children are given the privilege to make decisions with dampened consequence. We dampen it for them while they're being raised up, but for them to awaken, for them to really grow and mature into adulthood, and eventually one day hopefully become a teacher and a leader, we need to acknowledge that we and all our decisions have consequence, have very real consequence. And in order to step into that power, we need to assume that responsibility, where we make those discernments. We assume all the responsibility for the consequence of our choices, our actions, our words, and even just the way we think about other people and ourselves. So I really want to thank you for saying that, because it reminds me that, we're also growing up, and growing up isn't always the prettiest thing. The birthing pains that, where the mother is screaming and the child is going through this, very difficult journey, only to have that beautiful moment afterwards where the oxytocin is rushing and the heart is literally and figuratively open, so open that it has to be unconditional love. I think Joe Dispenza said that when you're in that space, there's nothing else you would trade this for. So that's why there's unconditional love. There's nothing else you would trade that moment for. And then you come to realize that it was all the pain beforehand that had to teach you what that beautiful moment is worth and why it is worth it. So I think that's what we're stepping into. And in that sense, I'm also very appreciative. I have a lot of gratitude for what we are experiencing, if we can frame it correctly. And this is where I believe my role comes in, your role comes in, is to help people frame what's happening in a way where this isn't you know, the problem is coming, the problem is developing. No, the solution is developing, and it's taking you through the final, you know, the final teaching, the teaching that we are it. It is not going to be an external savior. You know, I know we were going to mention before this idea of QAnon or the savior and the second coming of Christ and all these externalities coming to save us, when none of that has to be false. There could be good people in high places that are doing what they can to use their power, to use their positions of power to really usher in an awakening, but they can't do it for us. No matter how hard they try, no matter what position of power that they are in, imagine that everyone with money, all the elite, the 1% are actually doing all this to wake us up. They still couldn't, with all of their money, all their resources, all their power, they could not wake us up, even if that was their intention. So what does that make the solution?
The solution is that nobody can save me. I have to find a way to save myself. And in my view, the second coming of Christ is each individual embracing that Christ level of consciousness within themselves and saving themselves and resurrecting themselves.
I love it. I love it. Man, I think we're going to have to make this a regular thing. I really do. And I really mean that. You know, before we end here, I want to give you the opportunity to tell people how to find you, because let me just say it first. I really implore people to connect with White Walking Feather, to really connect from the heart, to ask how you can be a part of the Paysum Arts, which again, as he explained before, we have martial arts, which there's a lot of beauty and a lot of learning and inner growth that we can come to through martial arts. But Paysum Arts, I think, is a more evolved way to even frame what the whole purpose of that would be, what the whole foundation of it would be. So please tell people how they can find you, how they can support you, and how they can learn more from you.
Well, I have Paysum Arts on Patreon. So if you go to Patreon/Paysum Arts, that's PACEMARTS. I have different support levels there. So if people just want to attend the Sacred Heart Circles, they can sign up at that level. Or if they want to attend the Decolonization and have access to, you know, I got so many videos and audios now and written documents, and, you know, I've got a library set up with supporting documentation, that kind of stuff, to help with the decolonization process of the mind. So the Sacred Heart Circle is for the heart, and the decolonization is for the mind. And, you know, I will be working on a website so that I have a better interface to be able to organize it so that people can find information better, because Patreon really isn't that great for that. But when that happens, I also want to balance the emotional and the intellectual with videos on the physical, where I can use some of my martial arts training to have warm-up exercises and stretching, and, you know, get involved in the physical aspect of it, and also spiritual as well too. So you know, I'm a year in and I'm learning a lot, and we'll see where this goes, but the school is growing, and I appreciate any support people are willing to provide to allow me to continue to help others to heal and decolonize and stand in their own power, and have the courage and the ability to do that with love and integrity.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm reminded of some things I'll share with you afterwards. But what I would like to share with the audience is, below in the show notes, you'll find Vimeo and YouTube. Please donate. It helps the show grow. But what I do want to say is, I'll get this information. So everything that you guys donate for this specific episode, 100% of that will go towards the Paysum Arts, and to help my friend really get this beautiful message out to the world. There needs to be a lot more of this. So please, donate from the heart, donate, understanding that 100% will go towards this, which is going to teach people everything that White Walking Feather has been sharing with you today. It's really important. The time is now. And all I can say is thank you. And we'll have you back on. We'll definitely have you back on, make this a regular thing. And at some point, I feel like even online, as I'm working on online courses for the awakening protocols, there can be a lot of synergy here where, I can help with the technical side of getting your word out, and even the, like bringing it out to people that, my mailing list and my audience. I feel like time is now to gather the tribe. And it's very interesting when you think of the tribes gathering, a lot of the times we think in physical proximity, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's very beautiful, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I say that now let's use the tools we have to gather. Let's bring the resources that we have together, and let's allow those resources to bring people's gifts and their unique genius to the surface. Allow people like White Walking Feather, like myself, other people that are in the space doing the good work. Allow us to come together and use your voice, please. Chime in. At the end of all of these, I'm going to try, and I only had one audience member's question to really share here, but I would love to, anyone who sends in the donation and would like to have a question addressed in the next episode, I'd be happy to do that. And what I want to say is thank you for continuing to come back to Waking Infinity News and also this podcast. And please spread the word, hit the like button, subscribe, share this video out with as many people as you can. If you know people in Australia, share it with people in Australia, Canada, any piece of land, any person that you feel would be benefited by this. I know there's a lot of people that right now could use these words, could use this help. So again, thank you so much. I'm your host, Ben Stewart. This has been such a beautiful meeting with you. We need to do it quite a bit more often, not just, on a podcast, but also connect more from the heart. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Agreed. I thank you, Ben, for the opportunity for being able to express myself, and I appreciate your support and sharing my message with other people. Hopefully we can help one another and get through this. Thank you.
In Lakesh. All right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Please, like I said, go into the show notes if you want more information, and stick around for next time on Waking Infinity News.